we're giving you a tropical update, a very long-winded tropical update on what's happening out there in the Gulf of Mexico. We have a system out there which has not become a tropical depression or tropical storm just yet, but we're beginning to see signs that it might be on the verge of doing that. And even though the center of the forecast cone that I'll show you in just a moment is pointing towards central parts of Louisiana, the very left-hand side of the cone does include parts of southeast Texas, and so we still need to keep a close eye on what's happening with this system. Now, at about noontime today, we had a Hurricane Hunter fly out there, and they tried desperately to find a very well-defined, closed, low-level circulation with this system. They did not find that, but they did find a couple of eddies there that are fighting for supremacy, if you will. One of the two of those will take over and become the main circulation. Once that happens, once you start to get thunderstorms wrapping around that main circulation, that's when the ball will start to roll, and that's when we'll start to get tropical depression, when the winds get high enough for tropical storm, and eventually maybe even a hurricane out of this situation. And then a little bit later this afternoon, at about 4:30 or so, we had a Gulf Stream jet leave Florida and fly through the system. This one has a different job. It's not trying to find a center of circulation. This one is basically flying around the storm, trying to sample the atmosphere to see what steering currents might be out there. That data as well is going to be fed into the tropical computer models, and eventually that will give us a better idea of where the system is going. Now, there's still a lot of uncertainty about where it's going, simply because we don't have that close low-level circulation that the computer models can latch onto, and without knowing where to start, it's a little hard to know where to end. So that's the reason why there's some uncertainty on exactly where this particular storm is going to go. Here's the latest satellite loop of what's happening with our system. Several things I'm noticing here. Look past the green and the blue. Those are the tops of the tallest thunderstorms out there. Look past these fleecy clouds right here. You see these low-level clouds that are just barely seen there, showing up in light gray? Well, those low-level clouds do have a bit of a circulatory nature to them. They do appear to be circulating in a counterclockwise fashion. So in this region right here, something is trying to develop at this particular time. Now, one of the issues that we're seeing as well is that we just saw within the last few hours here, a couple of hours, a burst of thunderstorms on the southwest side of what appears to be a circulation center trying to form. If we begin to see overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning, these thunderstorms right here start to wrap around that center of circulation, that's when we will know that this thing is beginning to develop, and that's when this thing is beginning to take off. A couple of other things that I'm seeing out there, we've been saying all along that the wind shear was not all that strong and conducive for tropical development. You notice these rain bands here wrapping around the storm on all quadrants. Typically, when you see that from just about every quadrant of the storm, those rain bands beginning to develop, that means that the wind shear is not all that great, and that means this system is in a favorable area for development. Now, here's the latest data from the National Hurricane Center. We're calling it potential storm number 2 because, again, it's not even a tropical depression or a storm, but it has a 100% chance of becoming so, according to the National Hurricane Center. Max winds right now 30 miles per hour. Pressure is at 1,010. When that gets a little bit closer to 1,000 millibars, when the pressure starts to fall, that's when we will know we will have a depression or maybe a tropical storm, especially when those winds get up around 40. Right now, the movement is to the west and southwest at about 8 miles per hour. Here's the latest track from the National Hurricane Center. This is the best guess that we have right now of what is going to happen with the system. It's going to make a bit of a turn and go westward there for a while, and then move in a northerly direction, making landfall, we believe, as a hurricane, most likely over parts of Louisiana, becoming a tropical storm tomorrow, becoming a hurricane most likely before it makes landfall time sometime on Saturday. Most likely the center will go into make landfall somewhere to the east of the Houston area, but again, Houston and southeast Texas are right on the left-hand side of this forecast cone, so it's still a possibility if that center of circulation develops a little farther south than maybe what we're talking about. There's still a possibility the storm could go on the left-hand side of that track. Now, here is a look at what our computer models are saying, tropical computer models. The forecast is based on these right here that you see. That's why the National Hurricane Center has placed the center of the cone right there. But we still have some outliers. We still have some computer models that say, no, this thing is not going to turn to the north as soon. It's going to wait a little while longer to make that turn to the north. And if it does wait longer to turn to the north, say about Friday or so, then that opens up the possibility of this system heading into southeast Texas, maybe even as a hurricane. So we still need to keep our antennas up because of that. Here are the advisories that we have in place right now. None of the advisories cover any part of the Texas coastline. This is mainly a Louisiana thing right now. Storm surge watches in effect right now from central Louisiana all the way over to the area just south of the New Orleans area. Some of the storm surge waves could be as high as 6 feet with this particular storm, maybe even a little higher. There's a tropical storm watch in effect just southeast of New Orleans. It doesn't actually cover the city at this particular time. A lot of people going to New Orleans, in New Orleans, wondering what's happening with the storm. You can tell them they're actually not under a watch. And if the storm behaves like the computer models are saying, the worst of the storm is probably going to miss New Orleans to the west. Hurricane watches are in effect from around the mouth of the Mississippi all the way to the west of Cameron, Louisiana. That is just east of the Sabine River. Again, none of Texas is involved in this, but this is the area under the hurricane watch at this time. Here's the storm surge forecast. Now, what we're looking at are places that are in the yellow or orange, and you can see that's basically along the coast there in Louisiana. So places like Morgan City down to the south towards the coast, west of Grand Isle is where we expect the storm surge to be highest if the storm goes into Louisiana, where we think it will. You do notice some areas of blue that extend even over into parts of southeast Texas, so we do expect elevated tides. There could be some minor coastal flooding if the storm goes into the east of us. This graphic would change dramatically if the storm starts to behave erratically and move a little bit farther to the west. Then they would move that maximum storm surge a little bit farther to the west and maybe even include parts of the upper Texas coast. But for right now, the forecast is for the highest storm surge in the 3 to 6 foot range to basically be over the central and southeastern Louisiana coast. Here are tropical storm force wind probabilities. Okay, this is where the National Hurricane Center believes, according to the latest information they have, who has the highest probability of seeing the highest winds there, tropical storm force or above. And you can see the core of the highest winds heading right into central parts of Louisiana. Lake Charles is at 70%. New Orleans is at 38% right now. You go farther to the west, Galveston is at 54%, and Houston is at 35%. So basically, the farther east you go, the better chance you have of seeing tropical storm force winds. The farther west you go, there's not much of a chance at all, about a 10 to 20% chance for the western part of the viewing area, 30 to 35, maybe 40% around Houston, and then it goes on up from there as we begin to get closer to Beaumont and certainly over towards Lake Charles. Now, here are the scenarios as it relates to the Houston area. If the storm system were to track along the eastern side of the forecast cone, very few, if any, effects to Houston. As a matter of fact, we'll probably just have a lot of sunshine and extremely hot temperatures. The temperatures might even knock on the door of 100 degrees if that scenario comes into play. And typically what's actually happening is you have a lot of rising air around the hurricane, and then you have a lot of sinking air outside of it. That sinking air eats up the clouds, and it allows the temperatures to really soar. We had a situation just like that with Hurricane Rita. Remember, it missed us just to the north, and temperatures rose to 105 degrees around the Houston area. So again, if it tracks along the eastern side of the cone, not much of an impact on us here in southeast Texas. If it goes right up the middle of the cone, like the National Hurricane Center believes it may, then we could get some rain, okay? We could get some gusts of wind, maybe even up to tropical storm force, 40 miles per hour. We get that many times without any type of tropical system around. But no storm surge flooding would happen with that particular situation because we're going to be on the west side, the clean side of the storm. The winds will be coming offshore, and you can't get storm surge flooding pretty much if the wind is coming offshore. Now, if the system were to track on the far western side of the cone and say make a run right towards southeast Texas, it would have more time to spend spin out over the water, the chance of it actually becoming a hurricane before it makes landfall gets even higher. So we would have major effects around southeast Texas. That basically means hurricane force wind gusts are possible around the area. 6 to 12 inches of rain are going to be possible right along the core. Some isolated places could get close to 20 inches, and the storm surge could be 3 to 5 feet over here. So this is something that we'll need to keep a close eye on, exactly where the system makes that turn. That will determine where it's going to make landfall and if any part of our viewing area is going to be affected. Now, I've been noticing a lot of questions there on social media, a lot of people asking about the European computer model. We've been throwing this model out there for several years now. You've probably heard us say that this model consistently outperforms the others when it comes to tropical systems. And believe it or not, the forecast from the European model is very close to the actual center of the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone. So we put this into motion. This is 7 o'clock in the morning, circulation to the south of New Orleans. That circulation begins to intensify to the south of New Orleans. And then as we get into a little bit longer there, as we get into Friday evening, notice how the center will be southwest of New Orleans at that time, but heavy rain will be pounding the coast. High winds will be pounding the coast as well. And because that wind is coming off of the Gulf of Mexico, we could have some storm surge effects there along the Louisiana coast because of that. After that, what does the European model say the storm is going to do? Notice how the center of circulation on Saturday evening, according to the European model, is right in the middle of the forecast cone there. That's also about the time this system will be making landfall, sometime Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening, according to the European computer model. Then as we get into Sunday, that center would move slowly to the north and then be centered somewhere around Monroe, Louisiana, to the east of Shreveport. Because it's going to be moving so slow, this system is going to produce a tremendous amount of rain. And if the European forecast model is right, the core of those heaviest rains will be over Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and eventually into places like Tennessee, maybe even Kentucky. We're going to be on the western side of that. I don't think we'd see flooding rains if the center of circulation or the eye moves in the middle part of the cone. But if the eye were to move on the west side of the cone, then that would take this extremely heavy rain and bring it right into parts of southeast Texas, and that is not what we want. The forecast is still uncertain because we still don't have thunderstorms wrapping around a common center. Here is a look at future track for us over the next couple of days. It appears that as we go through the day on Thursday, we can see some scattered thunderstorms around here, not related to the tropical system at all. Then as we get into Friday, an isolated storm is going to be possible as we get into the afternoon hours. And you can kind of see the banded nature of some of these showers and storms that will begin to set up. That's the far outside fringe of our tropical system, which at that point should begin to make its track towards land. With that in mind, our forecast is based on the storm going right up the middle of the forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. In that particular scenario, a 40% chance for rain tomorrow, a 30% chance coming up on Friday, 60% on Saturday, 40% on Sunday. Then as we get into next week, those rain chances are going to start to go down, and those temperatures are going to start to go up once again. So with us being on Facebook Live right now, in addition to being on ABC13.com, and I believe some people on YouTube are watching as well, we might have some questions out there that people might want to know about.
That's correct, David. I'm actually monitoring the questions right now. A lot of people concerned about how this may impact travel. Pedro saying he has to fly into Houston on Saturday. Dawn says she has a cruise ship to get into on Sunday. What can these folks expect?
Well, it really just depends on where it tracks, what part of the cone that it tracks into. If it tracks up the center of the cone, we probably won't have, you probably won't have any problems in and out of Houston. But if it tracks on the left-hand side, then you would obviously have major problems. And I don't think we're going to have a clearer indication of exactly where the storm is going to track until at least tomorrow evening at the latest. So Thursday evening, after those thunderstorms starts forming around the center, after that data from the hurricane hunters gets into our computer models, we should have a better idea of, is this a Louisiana storm? Is this a Texas storm? We just don't know for sure at this time.
All right, David. Also, a lot of concern about the wind, especially people who have lawn ornaments and things of that nature. What kind of wind impact could we see?
That also depends on the track of the storm. Again, if it tracks up the center of the storm or to the east, we will have some gusty winds around here, but nothing unlike what we've seen. We've actually had some non-thunderstorm days with winds gusting up to 40 miles per hour. So I think we're kind of used to that sort of thing. It's if it makes that track on the left-hand side, that's when not only tropical storm force wind gusts will be possible, but hurricane force wind gusts will be possible. And because we know that's at least a possibility, and you've got concerns with lawn furniture and things like that, why not go ahead tomorrow and go out there and secure those items just to be ready for the storm, just in case it were to come in our direction.
A lot of questions about the spaghetti models. Josh Jimenez is asking if they can see the American versus the European. And the question is, why did they differ so much at this moment?
Well, the reason they differ, I'll go ahead and tell you that the reason they differ is because they're using different conditions to come up with their answer, basically their forecast. That's one thing. And the other reason is right now we don't have a well-defined center of circulation, so the models don't even know where to start. They're guessing on where the starting point is. And when you don't know exactly where to start, you don't know where to end, and that's why you get this big spread in the computer models that we're seeing out there right now. The other thing that they appear to be battling at this time as far as the track where the storm is going to go is just how strong the ridge of high pressure is located to the north of us. Computer models began to indicate just a couple of days ago, or actually yesterday, that the ridge of high pressure was actually a lot weaker and located a little bit farther to the east. That would allow the storm to make more of a track towards Louisiana. Some of the computer models think, well, the ridge of high pressure is a little bit stronger. That would keep it out over the Gulf of Mexico just a little bit longer. It would take longer to make that turn to the north. And in that particular scenario, it would have a better chance at moving towards southeast Texas. As far as the European model on the spaghetti plots and the GFS model, the American model, those models actually don't show up on the spaghetti plots because those are what we call global forecast models. We use those all the time, even in the wintertime, to forecast weather systems. When we show you the spaghetti plots, those are specific models that are actually geared towards forecasting tropical weather, and those they're not even generated unless there's a tropical system out there that has a chance of developing. So those models didn't even start running until just yesterday, whereas the GFS and the European model actually run all the time.
Stephen Rouse asks a very good question. It's a hypothetical. Now, if the center does come to the Houston area, will this be like Allison or Harvey in terms of rain? What could we expect? Okay,
that's a very good question. If the center was to come right to southeast Texas, move right over the Houston area, the reason we do not believe it's going to be like an Allison or a Harvey is because we don't think this system is going to stall, okay? The steering winds of the atmosphere appear to be strong enough to where this system is most likely going to keep moving. And that, of course, those of you here that have lived here in Houston for any time know that anytime we get a very slow-moving system or a system that stalls, we can just get tremendous rains around here that last and last and last, and that's where we get our worst flooding. In this particular situation, if it were to come right towards us, because it will keep moving, we will get one good day of extremely heavy rain around here and the wind, and then the system would move on. So I would say instead of it being more like, say, an Allison or more like a Harvey, I think it would be more like an Alicia, something of an Alicia type storm, a storm that comes in with some wind, with some rain. It's in, it's out, it's gone, but it certainly will be strong enough to leave its mark. Not saying it would even be as strong as Alicia, because Alicia was a Category 3 at landfall. We're not forecasting this system to be that. We're forecasting a Category 1 at landfall at this time. But as far as the character of the storm, it's more of a windstorm. There will be rain associated with it as well, but it's not a storm that's going to stick around and give somebody 30 inches of rain, no.
So I know we are expecting another update at 10 o'clock. What are you looking for specifically in that update?
Well, I'm looking to see, first of all, we're looking at the satellite picture right now. I'm looking to see between now and 10 o'clock if we start to get some of those thunderstorms wrapping around a common center. Hurricane Hunter missions will continue throughout the evening to see if something like that is going on. So what I'm trying to figure out with the 10 p.m. update is exactly where they're going to locate the center of circulation, if they're confident that that is where it is, and if they do locate that center of circulation, if those thunderstorms are actually wrapping around the center. Because if we start to see that happen this evening, by the time you wake up first thing in the morning, we can have a full-blown tropical depression, maybe even a tropical storm. So tonight at 10, we'll get an update on where the storm is exactly, and hopefully we'll have a better idea of is this storm going to the next level or not.
So we have a question about just the history here. Bernadette wants to know, based on your analysis, does this storm mirror anything that has come before, maybe Hurricane Rita specifically?
Well, not Rita, and not Katrina, not Harvey, not any of those storm systems. The two storms that come to mind are Edouard and Alicia. Okay, and both of those storms, the low pressure actually originated over land. They emerged out over the Gulf of Mexico. They happened to be in a perfect environment for development. They developed quickly, and then they moved towards southeast Texas. So it's really more of an Alicia type storm that we call the analog storm for this one, more than say a Harvey or something like that. Harvey was just a devastating storm, a Category 4. It's what they call a Cape Verde storm. It's a wave that originated, off the west coast of Africa, tracked all the way across the Atlantic, went through the Caribbean, made it into the Gulf of Mexico, blew up into a monster storm, and then you had the situation with Harvey. This is evolving from a disturbance that actually originated in parts of the Midwest. It tracked to the south, ended up over parts of Georgia. It came off the coast into the Gulf of Mexico, so that's a totally different situation from some of those other storms.
Gray Lane Bell is asking, why does the European model seem to win out more than half the time?
That is a very good question, why the European model wins out. I think the development of the model is just a step ahead. It takes a lot of money, a lot of computing power to power these computer models. And I think the European model, it seems like every time the U.S. model gets an upgrade, the European model just had its upgrade. So they do a very good job of staying ahead of the game, and they appear to invest more time and money into the model. So I've known for over 2 decades that the model seemed to be superior. I've actually been using it for close to 25 years. I kept the secret as long as I could that model was superior to the others, and it appears to still be that way. Probably the most impressive thing the European model has done recently was what it did with Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Sandy was just an extremely odd situation, a storm that if you go by the letter to the letter of what a hurricane is, it actually wasn't a hurricane at landfall. It had actually transitioned into what we call an ordinary area of low pressure, an extratropical area of low pressure. And the Europeans saw that. The Europeans saw about a week in advance the weird turn that that particular storm was going to make, and it forecasted it beautifully when all the other models didn't catch on to what Sandy was going to do until a couple of days before it did it. One of the other historic things I think the model did was for Tropical Storm Allison. It was the only model that knew ahead of time that Allison was going to stick around southeast Texas for 3 or 4 days. It was the only model that showed that. The rest of them showed the storm coming in, dropping 6 to 7 inches of rain on us, and just moving away. But the Europeans said, nope, it's gonna get here. It's gonna stay around here, stick around for several days, and anytime you get a tropical tropical system sticking around for that long, you open up the possibility of some tremendous flooding. And then the other thing I would think it did was with Hurricane Rita. It was ahead of the game in 2005 in showing that turn that Rita made. Originally, Rita was heading for Corpus Christi. Then it looked like it was heading towards Houston. It eventually moved into southwest parts of Louisiana, and the European did the best job of knowing that was what was going to happen with that storm.
Jennifer Moreno and Nicholas Dario are curious if the latest update shows any indication whether this will make landfall during the day or night.
That's a good question. Let's go ahead and look at the track one more time and put this thing into motion and see. It looks like late in the day is when it would make landfall if it followed the center part of the forecast cone. So we're probably thinking a Saturday afternoon if it goes right in the central parts of Louisiana. Now, the way this thing is set up, if it were to hug the right-hand side of the cone, it would make it to this section of Louisiana here, just southwest of New Orleans a little bit earlier. That might be as early as sometime Friday night. So it really just depends on what part of the cone that it should happen to come in on. If it came in on the west side of the cone and say made a run for us, it would most likely be Saturday night when the center would come in, and then we would still feel the effects of it coming up on Sunday. So it really just depends on where it comes in as far as what time it comes in.
Now, I'm seeing some folks who are concerned about flooding, especially after what they saw in New Orleans. If this storm were to track west more towards our direction, is that something we could see here?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we've been talking about this system for several days. I mean, anytime you get a tropical system, you can get tremendous rains from it. You can get rain rates of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 inches an hour sometimes, and that's why we're so concerned. And basically, a tropical storm or a hurricane is what we call a warm core system. That means the closer you get to the center of circulation, the warmer the temperature actually gets. The warmer the temperature, the more moisture the air can hold. And these tropical systems stay over the water. They absorb a tremendous amount of moisture from the waters below. And then when they hit land, they just dump all of that moisture down. And if they should happen to slow down or stall, that's when you can get tremendous rains. So now the good news is we are on the clean side of the storm. Again, if it goes into Louisiana, we're going to be on what's called the clean side of the storm, so we wouldn't get as much rain as, say, somebody like New Orleans or maybe even Mobile, Alabama, because they'd be on the dirty side of the storm. However, if the center of circulation comes on the left-hand side of this cone, the west side, then some of the core rains would move right into southeast Texas, and that's when our risk for flooding would go up substantially.
All right, this is a question for later in the year, but Jason Marcus is curious if we will see snow this year, as a result of this storm.
Jason, you want to know about snow? I haven't even begun to even think about the possibility of us getting snow. I know there's a theory out there that if we get a landfalling tropical system in southeast Texas, we almost always get some snow that following winter, and I can't say that would be wrong, but I would rather us not get the landfalling system and not get the snow than have it landfalling at the snow.
I lost who asked this question, but do we know how wide the cone of uncertainty is in terms of miles?
That's a very good question. It stretches all the way, the part of it that's on land right now from New Orleans to the Houston area. So however many miles that is, I believe that's almost 400 miles or so between the two cities there is about how wide it is. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the closer the center gets to land, the smaller the cone, of course, is going to be. But it's a pretty wide cone right now, a pretty wide area of uncertainty. So basically every place from New Orleans to Houston should be paying close attention to this storm, but we're most concerned about those people living in central and southwest Louisiana.
So we do have a question about, based on what you're seeing right now, how should people prepare? How should people prepare?
Well, What you don't want to do is wait until, oh, it's coming here. You know, you wake up on Friday morning, oh, the storm has made a turn and now it's coming right for Southeast Texas. Because if you wait until Friday morning to figure out that it's coming for Southeast Texas, you only have about 24 hours to prepare. So the best thing you can do is to begin to prepare early. Now, we've been putting out the information over the last couple of days. We're most concerned about those of you who live in a storm surge zone. Okay, because more people, you know, die in hurricanes from storm surge than anything else. It's not as much the wind as it is the storm surge. If you live in a storm surge zone, then you want to have a plan in place just in case a mandatory evacuation is issued for your area. What do I mean by a plan? Well, what I would do is contact a relative or somebody that lives away from the coast, farther inland, preferably outside of the cone of uncertainty, and just just pencil in a plan with them. Hey, if they tell me to leave, can I come stay with you for a day or two? Of course, they'll say yes, and you'll have your plan in place. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you might do, you can do it tomorrow even. It's going to be a little hot out there, but you could still do it. If you've got some loose furniture in the yard that needs to be secured, you want to do that, because in high winds, many times they can pick up, you know, pieces of furniture and whatnot, things that are laying around in the backyard and crash them through your window. And the last thing you want to do in a hurricane is lose your window. So that's another thing you can do. You still have just a little bit of time, if you hadn't pruned your trees in a while, to maybe get that done. If you feel like there's some branches up there that you don't quite trust, that's something else you might want to do. Away from that, a hurricane kit is a good thing to have. You know, get an ABC 13 hurricane tracking map and guide, and see how to put together that hurricane kit. And one of the things I've been stressing over the last couple of days, you can put in that kit, or, you know, your pictures and your important documents and things like that. I've got a mother-in-law who went through Katrina. She left. I was able to get her out of there before Katrina hit, but she didn't realize that it might be a storm that would basically wipe out her entire house and everything in it. That's what happened. And she didn't have all of her important papers. She didn't have all of her pictures and whatnot. So that's something that you might want to do. And just in case, you know, you want to have some cash on hand as well, because if the power were to go out, ATMs and things like that don't work.
So we have a question from Elizabeth. I saw a few other people who are in Florida right now. They may have actually chimed in on yesterday's live chat, but they are concerned about getting back to Houston. What would be the latest for them to leave Florida and theoretically get here safely?
Well, okay, and I'm assuming she means if the storm heads in our direction, right? Okay, so if the storm is heading in our direction, I mean, the landfall would be sometime late on Saturday. Saturday would not be a good travel day at all. So I would say Friday would be the latest date that you could probably leave and get here safely. By the time you get to Saturday, you know, if we know that especially a hurricane is heading in our direction and we're under hurricane warning, all of a sudden all the flights start getting canceled and you just won't be able to get in here. So if you could fly back in on Friday at the very latest, I would say go ahead and do that.
We do have some folks asking about what is the likelihood that we're going to see Harvey-like flooding, for example.
I don't see much of a chance of a Harvey-like situation. People bring up Harvey all the time, of course, for good reason. I mean, 2 years ago, we were hit with the worst rainstorm in U.S. history. There's never been a rainstorm like Harvey anywhere at any time in our history. That was the worst storm, hurricane or tropical storm or anything like that, that there's ever been. I mean, the record before Harvey for the most rainfall from a tropical system was right around 50 inches. And not only did we have places that got 50 inches of rain from Harvey, but we had places just south of Beaumont that had more than 60 inches of rain. That's 60 inches of rain in just a matter of a few days. And the average that you typically get in a year around here is about 50 inches or so. So the fact that we got a year's worth of rain rain in a few days made Harvey the worst rainstorm in history. Are we forecasting the worst rainstorm in history? Absolutely, positively not. Okay, but if the center of circulation were to go right over us, you could easily expect, 8 to 10 inches of rain, maybe even more than that in a couple of spots. Feeder bands will set up even after the storm leaves, and in some localized areas drop maybe even more rain than that. But I do not see a Harvey-like situation at all from this, because this is not a system that appears to be stalling. This system is forecasted. Every bit of data that I've seen says wherever it comes in, it's just going to keep on trucking. It's not going to stop and dump and dump and dump and dump. It's going to be a system that comes in, gives us a day's worth of rain, gives us a lot of wind, and then it's going to move on. Okay, so this is not a Harvey situation.
Martin Montez is asking if we can go over the spaghetti models again. What do they currently show?
Okay, and the good thing is here, these actually update, our computer updates on the fly, so this is the very latest information that we have for you. There's good agreement among these computer models here that this particular storm is going to take a track to the east of Lake Charles, the center of the storm, to the west of New Orleans, and come in into the central Louisiana coast. Those are the computer models, along with the European computer model, that the National Hurricane Center appears to be hinging its forecast on, and so that's the reason why they're favoring this area here. There's another suite of computer models that are indicating a possible, and this is the UK Met for those of you who are wondering, I believe, these particular computer models over here saying that there's still a possibility that the system could make it towards Houston. And if you look at the very bottom of the screen here, notice how these have a turn that happens a little bit later than the other computer models say. Okay, so it all has to do with how strong that high pressure is to the north. At about the time the storm gets right about there, is that high pressure weak? If it is, well, the storm will make that right turn and head right up into central Louisiana. Should be far enough away from us to only give us minor issues. But if the storm makes that turn a little bit later, well, then all bets are off. It might come directly towards southeast Texas, and in that case, we would have an issue. The important thing here is if you wait until the storm gets here to make your preparations, okay, you probably waited too late, because then you're down to a matter of hours before you may have to evacuate, or a matter of hours before you have to take care of all the things, make all the plans for your pets and whatnot, and you just won't have enough time in that particular situation. So that's why we're telling everybody to prepare right now.
Courtney is asking about a day trip she had planned for Beaumont on Friday. If she's going in the morning, could she come back later in the day based on what you're seeing?
Based on what I'm seeing, I think she probably could do that. And we'll look at this track one more time and just look at the timing of it all. This is Friday p.m., and it's basically at around 5 o'clock. The system, even if it was coming towards us in southeast Texas, it would still be well to the south of the Beaumont area. So I think a trip on Friday over to Beaumont's probably going to be okay. I certainly wouldn't recommend it on Saturday, though, because if it were to move in that direction, it would start to, the weather would start to go downhill before you would even make it home.
David, is there a chance that the storm could somehow go back into the Gulf and then reemerge?
Well, we get that question quite a bit. The problem with the Gulf of Mexico is anytime you get a tropical system in the Gulf that doesn't die, well, that means it has to hit some sort of land area. Either it hits Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, or Texas, or goes into Mexico. Somebody is going to feel the wrath of the system if it makes it into the Gulf of Mexico. That's why the Gulf is so serious. One of the more impressive things about this potential storm here is that even though we don't actually have a depression right now, even though we don't have a tropical storm. All of our computer models say this thing is going to really take off and take off before it makes it to the coast. And the National Hurricane Center is giving it a 100% chance of development. So we would love for it, not to hit something. We would love for no one to have to suffer from a tropical system. But in this particular case, it doesn't appear that is going to be the case. Now, if over the next 24 hours or so, we start to get some indications that, hey, this thing is not going to be as bad as what we were saying before, we'll certainly let you know that. I do remember several times with several storms that come out of the Gulf of Mexico from this direction, sometimes you can get some dry air to wrap around into them, and that may choke it off and kill it off just a little bit. But based on what we've seen on the water vapor imagery, we don't think there's going to be a tremendous amount of dry air wrapping into the system to kill it off. So we think a hurricane is certainly on the table at landfall for this particular system. The good news is we're not talking about a Category 3, 4, or 5 storm. We're talking about most likely a Category 1 storm with winds at less than 100 miles per hour. While that's still bad, it is not nearly as catastrophic as some of the storms we've seen.
So Beth is asking, should this storm track westward? Is this a type of event where we could see evacuations?
I would say yes. I don't think all of the zones, all of the evacuation zones would be evacuated, but certainly Zone A would be evacuated, and that's those areas, right around Galveston Bay there. The lowest elevation spots along the coast would be evacuated most likely. Now with Hurricane Alicia back in 1983, that storm, it developed so fast and it came in so fast, it didn't have as much of a storm surge as some of the other storms we've seen. This is not a maximum storm surge situation because the storm is developing so close to land. The worst storm surge situations we get happen when you get one of these storms in the southern Gulf of Mexico that moves in our direction, especially if it's a big storm, especially if it's a powerful storm, and especially if it has enough time, it can gather up a lot of water and push it towards the coast. Typically, when storms don't become hurricanes until right before landfall, like this one is forecast to do, well, it can still produce a storm surge, and in this case, maximum storm surge at 3 to 6 feet, but not anything as bad as what we've seen from some of the storms. So that's what we have for you right now. We will get another update on the storm before the 10 o'clock news coming up for tonight, and we will, of course, have that on ABC 13 and ABC13.com. The sooner we get more information from the hurricane hunters and Hurricane Center, we will, of course, let you know. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in just a couple hours.